Here's a common problem. Only 6% of people actually achieve their goals. Not those goals, life goals. And further to that, only 20% of people have some form of written intention of what they want those goals to be. The number is even smaller for the number of people who review those goals regularly. Now, my channel doesn't want you to be someone else. It wants you to be the best version of you, because ultimately, I've been trying over my life through various self-improvement things to be the best version of me. And to that end, I want to improve the statistics about goals by helping you. Goals have a dominant role in how we see ourselves and others. In fact, research has long shown a strong connection between goal setting and success. Goal setting is a bit like satellite navigation for your life. If I was to travel to a foreign country, I've got to be honest, I would want some sat-nav to take me to where I wanted to go. So you kind of need to start to view goal setting as the satellite navigation or the map that's going to take you to where you want to go in life. We all know goal-orientated people. You'll know the types, I know plenty of them. They're the people who don't see setbacks as personal failures, they see them as learning opportunities. And I've always wanted to be one of those people. I've tried doing goals with a smarter approach and all these kind of things, but ultimately I've succeeded in some ways and not in others. I've been pretty successful in life. I've got through school, medical school, being a junior doctor, now being a senior doctor, a consultant. I'm married, I have kids, I'm reasonably well off. But in my 40s, I find that I still want more out of life and I still want to achieve things. But I feel like I need that sat-nav, I need that roadmap to take me to where I want to go. And because of that, I started this journey where I thought that I could do a bit of research and see what sort of things were associated with success in terms of doing goals. So I sat down, I did some research, I read some books, blogs, listened to podcasts, and I came up with a whole load of general principles that I put into practice over the last couple of years. And this video is my reflection on the things that I found out and what I thought worked, and I hope that it helps you achieve the things that you want to achieve in life. Brainstorming your high-level goals. This is the bit that I found the most difficult. I think the reason for that, and why I think a lot of people find this difficult, is it's quite difficult to see what you want your life to be in the future, especially when you're quite young. And what inevitably happens is you just write down a whole load of tasks or generically cheesy things like make a difference in life. The way that I went about doing this, after a lot of thought and a bit of research, was I sat down with some time and I daydreamed about what I wanted to see my life as in the future. After I'd done that for a period of time, I sat down with a pen and paper and I just wrote down everything that was in my head. And I ended up, rather surprisingly, with about 20 A4 pages worth of just random stuff. At first, the list was chaotic. It was just full of random tasks that were in my head, desires for things and stuff like a camera gimbal. And this, in general, needed to be sorted and filtered. So this was the next stage in my journey. How did I sort and filter all these things into some sort of cohesive set of goals? The way that I found to do this was to consider my personal ethics. So I took my 20 pages of tasks and general stuff and I started to score things off, things that looked like tasks, things that looked like minute details, things that looked like general desire for things that I wanted, like a camera gimbal or a drone. And in general, I tried to whittle this down to things that looked a bit like goals. I used the second idea in Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which was begin with the end in mind. If you aren't sure what a high-level goal is, it's an embodiment of our values and priorities, our vision for what the future has to offer, our idea of what success looks like in terms of health, wealth, relationships, spirituality, and things like that. However, figuring out our core values is still very important. This is still really challenging for some people. And I find it easier to try to imagine my life as a company and to write a mission statement. Now, writing a mission statement is still pretty difficult. You know, Tesla, Land Rover, Nike, they probably have a lot of people to write down and a lot of marketing to test their mission statements. But essentially what you want to do is start with your core values as a foundation. So that would be, for me, for instance, being a lifelong learner. It's important for me to have health and well-being as part of my long-term plans. These things are the core of who I am, amongst other things. And this forms the foundation of a pyramid with your mission statement and the vision for your life at the top. A mission statement is really what we do, how we do it, and what we wish to achieve. Your vision is more where you see your life going, how you feel that your life will contribute amongst your friends and family and greater society. But essentially, to build goals, we need to build a solid foundation. I think a large part of people's failure is because they don't recognise who they are. And a lot of this is finding out who you are. It's understanding the core of you and what is important in life. And I think when you make up goals that aren't consistent with that core value, that's where you start to fall down, because it doesn't mean anything to you, and it needs to mean something to you. Locke and colleagues have done a lot of research into goal setting, and Locke's research shows 5 general principles that they feel are important to goal setting. That is clarity, challenge, commitment, feedback, and complexity. Now, in the last bit, I worked a lot in terms of developing the reasons and the core beliefs behind your goals, and that starts along the process of clarity. Now what you need is specificity. So I'd suggest that the next best thing to do, which is what I did, and you will see a lot, probably for good reason, is using the SMART acronym. So that's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. A lot of people add the ER part to the end of it, which I'll come back to later. This allows you to make sure that your goals are obvious when they've been achieved, you know when you will have achieved them by, and you're double checking to make sure that they are realistic. As Norman Vincent Peale once said, shoot for the moon and you'll land amongst the stars. And while I think it's important that you have lofty goals, I do think there's an element of pragmatism that's required. You find that if you live on top of a mountain and that you want to drive a Ferrari, the desirability of that is far greater than the feasibility of that. And I think you need to keep that in mind when you're considering your goals. You need to think about, at this point in my life, what can I achieve realistically versus what I want. It is important to have things in the long run that are potentially achievable, but maybe just out of reach. But you also need to consider the trajectory of your life and where you might go from this point. So I found that the point where feasibility and desirability changes over time, especially as you age, as you progress through life, as you have more achievement and more success with goals, you find that what is possible becomes easier and more achievable. So for instance, this log, I couldn't move this log. It's a massive tree. But if I happen to work and get sufficient money that I could then buy a chainsaw and a cart, I could chop it up into lots of little bits. So what was an unfeasible task has become a feasible task. And I think that occurs with goals throughout your life. That said, goals need to provide sufficient challenge for you to want to achieve them. If they're too easy, you tend to give up because they're not worthwhile and the reward is not really worth the effort. If they're too difficult, you get demoralised and you don't progress towards them. And certainly I think that's something that I've been suffering in my life, is that I sometimes have set challenges that have been too big for that point in my life. So one way to do that is to do the next step, and that is salami slicing your intermediate and high level goals into smaller component parts. Basically, what you need to do is you need to slice up your high-level goals into 5-year and 1-year targets or intermediate goals, and then those intermediate goals need to be deconstructed down into monthly, weekly and daily events. Those kind of events, the closer in terms of proximity they are to you now, like daily and weekly events, are probably going to be things like habits, tasks and system-based things. And as James Clear points out in his book Atomic Habits, the goals of people who win and lose are often the same. It's probably the systems that they have in place that makes the difference. And to that end, I think it's really important, and I found it important at this stage, to focus on the systems that lead you to being the person who's going to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. Trying to achieve your goals is hard. In fact, the two most common things that people do, if you look up the research, is they try to lose weight or exercise more. And I think we all know how hard that is. And it's often because you encounter obstacles. And a bit like if you were on a sinking ship, you wouldn't necessarily try to find a life jacket when your ship was sinking. In fact, you would probably want to know where these things were in advance. So, a bit like this with your goals, it's worth pre-planning things that you want to do to try to mitigate some of the obstacles that you might come across for your goals. So for instance, you might think about pre-planning a response. So for instance, when I work a night shift, I won't go shopping because I know if I go shopping and I'm trying to lose weight, I'm going to buy loads of cookies and things like that when I'm tired. With exercise, you put your stuff out the night before, so you know that you're going to reduce the obstacle of not wanting to exercise because you're making an excuse because of not finding your stuff. The next thing is the goal gradient hypothesis. And that basically states that all human beings work harder the closer they are to the goal reward. I'll give you a for instance. If I was to give you $1,000 a month for 5 months, or at the end of 5 months, give you $5,000, but nothing in between, you would choose the $1,000 a month. You're still getting the same amount of money, you're still getting it in the same amount of time frame, but if I ask you to do some work for that money, you're far more likely to choose option A, where you get the reward sooner. You can make it even more interesting. You could basically say $1,000 a month for 90 months, or at the end of 90 months, I'll give you 90,000. Or you can make it even more simple and say, I'll give you $1,000 a month, but in 50 months, I'll give you 90,000. So you would get more by delaying your reward. And most people would choose the $1,000 a month because the reward is much nearer. So what you need to do is you need to periodically have small rewards so it feels like you're much closer to your reward and your end goal. So your rewards should be set up to reflect this. Small but meaningful rewards along the way are better than one big reward at the end. And you should tie this in with how you set up your goals and how you write about them to help yourself get to where you need to be. New Year's resolutions are notoriously poorly completed. So I want you to never do a New Year's resolution ever again. Instead, I want you to do the last thing, which is the ER part of the SMARTER acronym, and that is evaluate and review. What I found quite useful in this process was periodically looking to see whether I was achieving what I wanted to achieve. A bit like playing a racing game with Mario here, where you get to checkpoints and you get a time bonus at the end of each checkpoint. Getting those small wins when you complete a goal is quite good, and it makes you feel like the person who can get things done. And that's who you want to become. Like James Clear says in Atomic Habits, if you make little votes for the person who you want to become, eventually you will start to become and believe you are that person. The things that I've wanted in my 20s, 30s and now 40s have changed a lot over the years, and I think that's why it's important that you evaluate and review your progress, and New Year is a good time to do that. The other thing is, some goals might not necessarily be lifelong goals. They might be things that you achieve inside a year or 5 years. And you'll find that once you've completed those things, they perhaps unlock the key to you doing something that was once not feasible and becomes a new short-term or long-term goal. My goal with this was to help you reach your goals, and I hope that it has. Until the next video, live life well and get outside into some wild spaces.